Boghossian is a full-time faculty member at Portland State's philosophy department and likes to remind us that he was thrown out of the doctoral program at the University of New Mexico's philosophy department. No less than Richard Dawkins acknowledges Boghossian's techniques of friendly persuasion, and I have personally been so stirred not just by his argument, but by his sincere and generous, even loving promotion of, quote, an honest and authentic way to live life. Welcome to Bibliocracy, Peter Boghossian.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
And what kind of person actually wants to, in our completely atomized, metafictional, weird world, live an authentic way of life? It's a premise that I want to talk to you about just for a moment, a kind of assumption, because I don't know about you, but I meet a lot of people who don't seem to want that.
I think that's true. I think you're correct. Many people don't want to have a life of authenticity and don't want to sincerely engage their beliefs and have meaningful friendships and relationships with others. I think, to echo back to Plato, I think it's because they don't understand. They're lacking information. And if they only had the right information, then they'd realize that these sorts of relationships give their life meaning. And again, Aristotle talks about that. I don't know how much you want to get into philosophy, but the idea that we can have, and I talked about this in my TAM talk on authenticity, that we can have authentic, meaningful relationships with people that will give our own lives meaning. The way to do that, there is a way to do that, and the way to do that is through honesty and sincerity and just really listening to people and just being yourself. And if people don't like that, then they're not your friends. Then you move on.
So, Peter Boghossian, I think Richard Dawkins was being a little bit sly about your friendly persuasion because as much as I know we both admire him, he is often perceived as maybe a little less interested in being friendly in the way that you encourage by way of kind of, let's say, organizing a cadre or a corps of what you call street epistemologists, people who will be civilian philosophers and will, in fact, be generous and available and humane. And I noticed from watching you on YouTube and reading your books and listening to interviews that you are a very always polite and engaging and welcoming kind of presence, even though, or perhaps because of, the fact that you are trying to persuade people, not just piss them off.
Thanks. I appreciate that. That is sincere on my part. That's not any kind of a cultivated affectation or something. I sincerely want to know what people think and what people believe and why they believe what they believe. I would never presume to say that one approach is the approach, that my approach is the way or that Richard's approach is the way. We all make our own contributions. My particular contributions happen to be in the realm of interventions and treatments so that when we're speaking with people, we can either do one of two things. We can either help them to align their beliefs with reality, or we can find out that they know something we don't know, and they can help us align our beliefs with reality. So the techniques in the book that I speak pretty extensively about them in Chapter 4, the techniques in the book really rest on not creating adversarial relationships with people, genuinely listening to what people have to say, and being civil. Now that doesn't mean you're not blunt, quite the contrary. You're blunt and you're direct and you're honest with people. And to relate it back to what we spoke about in the beginning of the conversation, you're sincere in your responses and you're willing to change your mind. So we all have our own contribution to make. Different people fight this problem in our society in different ways, and this is my contribution.
And what is it, to perhaps ask an obvious question, but one which I think needs the answer from you in particular, what is it about our schooling, our societal relationships, our expectations, and our worldview which creates this need for what might be considered a kind of development of what you might consider a remedial education, a skill that you would hope that people already had arrived at?
That is a fantastic question. If you're asking, how did we get in this mess? The answer is, I don't know. I can't give you a genealogical account of this. although I was just reading something today about anti-intellectualism, but I think it's far deeper than just anti-intellectualism. I think it really goes or hits at the very root of how people live and how people engage others in this postmodern society. I don't know how we got in this mess, but I do have some answers. I don't know if they're the answers for how we can get ourselves out of this mess.
Indeed you do, and that's my segue to invite you to read from the first chapter of your terrific new book, which is called A Manual for Creating Atheists by Peter Boghossian, so that one of the pleasures of this program, at least for me, is getting to hear the writer read his or her work. So here he is.
Chapter 1, Street Epistemology. Street, noun, a public thoroughfare. Epistemology, noun, the study of knowledge. This book will teach you how to talk people out of their faith. You'll learn how to engage the faithful in conversations that help them value reason and rationality, cast doubt on their beliefs, and mistrust their faith. I call this activist approach to helping people overcome their faith street epistemology. The goal of this book is to create a generation of street epistemologists, people equipped with an array of dialectical and clinical tools who actively go into the streets, the prisons, the bars, the churches, the schools, and the community, into any and every place the faithful reside, and help them abandon their faith and embrace reason. A Manual for Creating Atheists details, explains, and teaches you how to be a street clinician and how to apply the tools I've developed and used as an educator and philosopher. The lessons, strategies, and techniques I share come from my experience teaching prisoners, from educating tens of thousands of students in overcrowded public universities, from engaging the faithful every day for more than a quarter century, from over 2 decades of rigorous scholarship, and from the streets. Street epistemology harkens back to the values of ancient philosophers, individuals who were tough-minded, plain-speaking, known for self-defense, committed to truth, unyielding in the face of danger, and fearless in calling out falsehoods, contradictions, inconsistencies, and nonsense. Plato was a wrestler and a soldier with broad shoulders. He was decorated for bravery in battle. Socrates was a seasoned soldier. At his trial, when facing the death penalty, he was unapologetic. When asked to suggest a punishment for his crimes, he instead proposed to be rewarded. Hellenistic philosophers fought against the superstitions of their time. Lucretius, Sextus Empiricus, Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius, and others combated the religious authorities of their period, including early versions of Christianity. They thought the most important step was to liberate people from fear of tortures of the damned and from fear that preachers of their epoch were spouting. Hellenistic philosophers were trying to encourage Stoic self-sufficiency, a sense of self-responsibility, and a tough-minded humanism. Street epistemology is a vision and a strategy for the next generation of atheists, skeptics, humanists, philosophers, and activists. Left behind is the idealized vision of wimpy, effete philosophers, older men in jackets with elbow patches, smoking pipes, stroking their white, unkempt beards. Gone is cowering to ideology, orthodoxy, or the modern threat of political correctness. Enter the street epistemologist, an articulate, clear, helpful voice with an unremitting desire to help people overcome their faith and to create a better world, a world that uses intelligence, reason, rationality, thoughtfulness, ingenuity, sincerity, science, and kindness to build the future. Not a world built on faith, delusion, pretending, religion, fear, pseudoscience, superstition, or certainty achieved by keeping people in a stupor that makes them pawns of unseen forces because they're terrified. The street epistemologist is a philosopher and a fighter. She has savvy and street smarts that come from the school of hard knocks. She relentlessly helps others by tearing down falsehoods about whatever enshrined truths enslave us.
That's Peter Boghossian offering the introduction, by which I mean the invitation to join a movement for which he has provided a kind of manual. The title of the book is A Manual for Creating Atheists. And the core of your argument, it should be said up front, is that independent of one's critique of, quote, religion, which you're not particularly focused or so concerned about or immediately concerned about, is in fact your negative critique of something called faith and the damage and the problem that it causes in terms of getting in the way of all those, to my mind, at least, virtuous behaviors and smart and, what did you call them, self-defense moves, which just stirred me when you read it just now, Peter Boghossian. And your definition, or your way of considering this distinction between religion and faith is, and I quote, "Faith is an unreliable epistemology." I thought that was a very, carefully chosen phrase, and I wondered if you'd explain why you set it up that way.
Sure. So you're correct. The book does not target religion. The book is not an anti-religious screed. The book targets ways that people come to truth, ways that people attempt to know the world that simply will not lead them to the truth. And if we can help people develop more reliable ways to think, ways that they can rely upon that will align their beliefs with reality. So the project is about helping people. And currently, many people, in fact, the vast majority of people on the planet, are using conspicuously bad ways to try to understand the world. So the book, in a sense, A Manual for Creating Atheists, is about helping people to align their beliefs and cognitions with reality, starting with the most egregious perpetrators first, faith-based epistemologies, or using or invoking faith as a justification for what one thinks that one knows.
If you're enjoying this kind of thoughtful, careful prose by one of the most, to my mind, entertaining and engaging philosophers as much as I am, then you'll definitely want to buy this book and read it. It's called A Manual for Creating Atheists, and it's not a polemic. It's beyond a polemic. It's for people who largely have, like me, come to a point where I'm unwilling personally, maybe out of some vanity or maybe a desire for that honest and sincere life, to put up with a lot of nonsense. And I say entertaining, Peter Boghossian, because the book includes dialogues and interventions, it includes charts and tables, and it's a very fun book to read, in addition to being one that maybe could change people's lives. So if it's okay with you, Peter Boghossian, on page 24 of A Manual for Creating Atheists, under a section in which you continue to challenge or redefine the idea, or what I might call the problem of, quote, faith, you've provided a very fun and helpful chart. And if it's still okay with you, Peter, I'd like to read on the left side of the chart what we might call, the sort of standard apologist position of faith?
Yeah, so on the left side of the chart, these are things that people hear all the time. So these are things that when people use the word faith, they say, for example, the first one is, my faith is beneficial for me. And so I would encourage people to translate the word faith as pretending to know something you don't know. So the book has a table in it in which the most common, or among the most common sentences with the word faith in it are translated. It helps to make the meaning of the sentence more clear.
As I explain to my students and sort of force them, when you've got to stand up and say something, think about it in advance. And when you've got to have a defense ready, and when you've practiced doing that a few times, you gain confidence and skill, and you get a little smarter, and if you find something problematic in your response, you can change it and try to get a more accurate answer. So let's do it, Peter. I'm going to read the, almost cliched phrases that you hear from people who are faith-based or have a worldview that's based on this, let's call it problematic thinking, and you're going to offer the substitute phrase that suggests what they really mean. Here we go. I have faith in God.
I pretend to know things I don't know about God.
Perfect. Here we go. Life has no meaning without faith.
Life has no meaning if I stop pretending to know things I don't know.
People listening out there are getting the idea. Here's one of my favorites because it has a kind of alternative answer as well. I don't have enough faith. This is supposed to be funny. I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. Ha, ha, ha.
I don't pretend to know things I don't know enough to be an atheist. Now, I'll give you the alternative translation of that. Alternatively, if atheist is defined as a person who doesn't pretend to know things he doesn't know about the creation of the universe, then the sentence becomes, I don't pretend to know things I don't know enough to be a person who doesn't pretend to know things he doesn't know about the creation of the universe.
So we're having some fun here, and by way of fun, I mean that we're taking apart things at that core epistemological base, which is so esteemed by Peter Boghossian and by myself. Let's do a couple more here. You have faith in science, Peter Boghossian.
You pretend to know things you don't know about science.
You have faith your spouse loves you.
You don't pretend to know things you don't know about your spouse's love.
If everyone abandoned their faith, society would devolve morally.
If everyone stopped pretending to know things they don't know, society would devolve morally.
Well, you get the idea, folks, and here's my favorite one of all time, which is this almost impossible to argue people out of. Maybe Peter Boghossian will help us. Narcissism of the tiny speck of the person against the universe. My faith is true for me, which really means?
Pretending to know things I don't know is true for me.
Right. So if you're laughing, if you're angry, if you're engaged, then Peter Boghossian, my guest this week on Bibliocracy, has done his job. And I argue that he has done it and more in this 275-page book called A Manual for Creating Atheists. We're going to do one of the interventions toward the end of the program. But as an educator, as a person who teaches at a public university, a public education institution, I did want to check in with you about what I take as extremely negative critique of one area that has become so obnoxious within the public education sphere and arguably in the sort of civic arena generally, is this very crippled and compromised view that wraps up everything in some excuse about respecting, quote, multiculturalism. And you make one of the most compelling critiques of what gets called tolerance. I wonder if you could go there just a little bit for us, Peter.
Sure. So in the book, in Chapter 8, I talk about multiculturalism, and I do want to pause before I begin and say that for those not indoctrinated in the academic zeitgeist, in other words, for those who have not been in academia or not been in graduate school, what I'm about to say is there's no way anybody could possibly think that this is correct unless they've experienced it firsthand. And you have experienced this firsthand, and many people in academia at some level, the higher up you go, master's degree, doctorate, professor, etc., the more one is likely to experience this. But critiques of epistemologies, critiques of the way people know things, have been turned or morphed from a critique of the way people attempt to know reality to a moral taboo. So helping people to reason more, to align their beliefs with reality, and to use more reliable methods of coming to truth and to hone their reasoning skills was turned into a moral critique, particularly in regard to faith. And I talk in the book about the incredible problems this has caused and what we've done to a generation of students. So withholding epistemological critique, withholding critique or criticism about the way people come to know things, it's kind of complicated. It's complicated only in the sense that I'm constantly made aware of, for listeners who are listening to this, who are going to think this problem could not possibly be as serious as it is. But before I continue, I just want your take on how widespread you think this is.
Oh, I think that it is largely confined to those places of thought manufacture that have that, what you called, that sort of confusing responsibility, we are told, of making better people and sort of a moral critique. And it has been very much confused in terms of what you are trying to do, which is this, let's just call it what it is, a kind of a truth test that I think should trump that at every opportunity.
Yeah, and that's exactly what it is. And what happens, what we see in contemporary academia today, is the result of not valuing the wrong things. When we stop valuing the truth, the whole enterprise collapses. We substitute what we want to believe for what's true. We substitute what's convenient or what's expedient. Or when we become more worried about other people's feelings than what's true, then we get into a big mess. Then the ideas that we have are mediated by something, by anything. we've lost sight of the truth, or trying to have an honest, sincere inquiry about the nature of reality, how people come to know, and everything that falls under that. And its essence, multiculturalism and tolerance are very important, and they're needed for a democratic society. But what's happened is that the multiculturalism has been extended from the immutable characteristics of people, like height and race and skin color, eye color, et cetera, race being in quotes, because I don't think that's a valid biological construct. But so what's happened is that immutable characteristics that people possess, which was the initial thrust of multiculturalism, as well it should be, that's been extended to the realm of ideas. And so the ideas that people have and ways that people come to knowledge have been granted this kind of privileged hands-off status. And among the consequences of that is that it's a type of self-imposed blasphemy rule. So we can't question students' faith. Educators can't question the way people come to knowledge in the classroom, and that deepens people in their delusions because they never have those challenged. And then, again, the problem is viciously circular because then they think, well, they become insulted, they become offended, they have some non-epistemic defense for the rationalizations that they have. It's a very, very serious problem, and from speaking with colleagues around the country, it's ubiquitous.
And it also comes from a failure of imagination in the sense that it's not that hard, folks, to have two critiques at the same time. It's not that hard to understand both the negative impact of imperialism and colonialism and also the negative impact of religion and other cultural forces. People have a lot of trouble with keeping two ideas in their head at the same time.
Exactly. So the essence is that a critique or a criticism of an idea is not the same as an attack on a person. Well, if you have a dangerous idea, or you have an idea that maybe it's right, it's true, then asking people to suspend judgment or dialect or conversation, or to make that immune from criticism or putting a big stop sign in the dialectical highway, that is making everybody's situation worse. That is not the same as criticizing someone on the basis of an exogenous characteristic like skin color. It just doesn't seem to be a complicated idea, but for whatever reason, we've now institutionalized part of this problem so that the dialogue has gotten cut off. And if you have a chance, you should I would urge your listeners to check out FIRE, F-I-R-E. It's a fantastic organization, and it's popped up around defending rights of free speech in academia. And Greg, who heads the organization, has come in and spoken to my class, and you simply would not believe the sorts of problems that he encounters and legal challenges to free speech issues on campuses across the country. It's truly flabbergasting.
Well, thank you for fielding that difficult question. Now let's do something fun in closing. You teach, Peter, and on page 195 begins your recreation of a visit from an upset parent. His name is UP, and he's come to see you because he's taken, quote, offense at your what is presumed to be impossibly impolite questioning of faith and perhaps even his own students' faith. These little dialogues or interventions are some of the most fun and helpful things in the book. So once again, I'll be the upset parent, okay, Peter, and you be yourself.
Great.
Here we go. I told you on the phone, you've crossed the line by asking questions about my son's faith.
Oh, okay, wait, please. First, what class is your son taking?
Critical thinking.
Okay, thanks. And why do you think faith should be off the table?
Because it's an abuse of your authority. You have no right to ask students. They're young. They'll believe what you tell them.
Okay. So what should I talk about in the critical thinking class?
Anything except that.
Algebra?
That's ridiculous. You know yourself you shouldn't talk about algebra.
True, but I'm trying to establish a baseline. Things I should and shouldn't talk about, right? So, I shouldn't talk about algebra, but what about other faiths? What about Islam? Should I talk about Islam?
No, there may be Islamics in the class. No, definitely not.
Should I talk about how people come to knowledge?
Yes, as long as you don't talk about faith.
So, just to be clear, I should talk about how people come to knowledge as long as it doesn't relate to faith. Is that your view? I don't want to put words in your mouth.
Yes, that's correct.
And what about Noah's Ark? Can I talk about that?
What? What about it?
Am I allowed to talk about how the people in the big boat and all the species got off and such?
No.
What about the koala bear?
What about the koala bear?
Can I talk about how the koala bear went from the Ark to Australia?
What are you talking about? What koala bear?
You know those cute little fuzzy bears? They're called koala bears. They live in Australia. Have you ever been to the zoo?
I know what a koala bear is, but why are you talking about koala bears?
Because I want to know how the koala bear got to Australia, and I want to know if you think I can talk about this.
But what does the koala bear have to do with anything?
Well, once the koala bear got off the Ark, how did it get to Australia?
It immigrated, it migrated, you know.
But it only eats eucalyptus leaves, and there's no eucalyptus leaves where the Ark allegedly landed. So how did the koala bear get to Australia?
It used to eat other things.
So it evolved? So should I or shouldn't I talk about the koala bear?
You shouldn't talk about it because you're really talking about faith, and that's beyond your authority.
Okay. So I'm just trying to clarify this for myself. I feel like I don't get it, but I really want to understand your position. I can...
The koala bear lives in Australia.
Is that a question?
No, I'm saying the koala bear lives in Australia.
Okay.
So you're saying that the koala bear couldn't get to Australia without those leaves?
No, I'm not saying anything. I'm merely asking, how did the koala bear get to Australia if there's no eucalyptus where the Ark crashed? At this point, he abruptly whipped out his phone and made a call to his religious leader, and he asked, the leader didn't answer the phone, so he asked how the koala bears got to Australia after Noah's Ark landed. Okay, so when you don't know something, you called someone and asked them, right?
Yeah.
So maybe if these issues are raised in class, when your son comes home, or if he doesn't live at home, then when he comes see you, maybe you could talk these questions over with him. Do you think that would help?
No.
No?
Well, yes, but he shouldn't have questions.
Everyone has questions. You have questions. You just called your pastor with questions.
That's different.
How come you're allowed to have questions, but he shouldn't have questions?
Okay, he can have questions.
Now, really think about this before you answer. Please. We're just two dads in a room. I have two kids, and like you, I love them very much and sincerely want the best for them. Do you really, really think your son's better off having no questions? Is that really the type of life you want for your son, truly?
No.
Agreed. I don't want that for my kids either. In your son's critical thinking class, that's what we do. I ask students to question everything. Everything. I ask questions. Just like you, just like I asked you questions today. I never tell you what to think. I asked you questions. We finished with a handshake and an understanding.
Hey, that little bit of radio drama is courtesy of your host, Andrew Tonkovich, playing upset parent, and my terrific guest this week on Bibliocracy, Peter Boghossian, playing himself in a recreation of a very, I think, respectful, funny, engaging dialogue that reflects exactly what his core of street epistemologists, of teachers, and almost anybody can do by way of taking others seriously and at the same time challenging the way that they see the world. Thanks so much for writing this terrific book and for being my guest this week on Bibliocracy.
Thank you.
Downloads of this program and others are available free for 90 days at the KPFK archives. Thanks to engineer Stan Mizrahe. For more, see the Bibliocracy blog and find me, Andrew Tonkovich, on Facebook. Tune in next Wednesday night at 8 for another half hour of readings and conversation about the literary arts on Bibliocracy.
Join us on Sojourner Truth Tuesday to Friday, 7 to 8.